Purpose Highway is a space for discussions that drive connections toward people's highest purpose to build a better self and a better world. Join me for Season 1, where I start to uncover stories of entrepreneurs and thinkers that are making an impact. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everybody. It is Scott Mason, revving up for another trip down the Purpose Highway, and I've got sitting in the front seat right next to me, Karen Ripley. Karen is a comedian, and she has been a comedian since 1977. She also writes for both the stage and the screen. Karen's history is impressive. She's performed with Whoopi Goldberg. She's opened for Will Durst and Judy Tenuta. She won the Ms. Magazine Top Lesbian Comic in the U.S. award. And she has been on television shows and traveled throughout the United States doing various routines. Karen, it is an honor and a pleasure having you with us here today. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Scott. Let me correct one thing, honey.
Please.
I'm not the top Ms. Magazine comedian. There were about 100 of us.
Well, you know what?
One of the top.
Well, I love your modesty, and you know what? You're always going to be the top for this audience, so...
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
It's been great. You know, I'm going to go right to the subject matter of this podcast today for the first question, and dive right into it as connected to you. As I mentioned earlier, you are a comedian, but has comedy and being funny always been your purpose? And if so, when and how did you discover that?
Oh my God, it has been. I was probably about 5, and I saw I Love Lucy, and I thought, I want her job. And I was a funny little kid, and friends in school used to say, when you become a famous comedian, don't forget me. And I'd be, yeah. And I just was a nut. And I just always wanted to do that. And I'll tell you, it wasn't until I quit partying and drinking and acting stupid that I was able to get on stage and tell a joke. I was busy in my 20s. I used to sort of, well, it was the big lesbian thing going on the West Coast, and I kind of followed my vagina around town wherever it went. And then one day I sort of got my senses, put away the alcohol, and 6 months later I'm on stage. And it almost felt like destiny or something.
Wow.
I was in the right time, I guess.
How did you know that it was destiny when you stood up on that stage? And how did you prepare yourself for that very first time?
Well, the only way I could say it was destiny is because I always wanted it, but I was too afraid, too shy in that way. I mean, I could clown around with friends. But then I found... in high school, theater, and directed a couple of school plays, and it was just, this is a high, being up here and applauding, and people just kept saying, you're funny, read the phone book, we'll laugh. And so I just said, okay, so I tried to make up characters, and most of my jokes were dirty jokes, of course. When I was a little kid, there was this newspaper, an addition to the newspaper called Parade Magazine. You probably have it all over the country.
Being 23.
And on the front page, yes, on the front inside cover, they had this thing called My Favorite Jokes. And it would be jokes from Milton Berle and, Carol Burnett, and I used to cut them out and save them in a suitcase because I knew one day I would need material. And I did that as a kid. So it just feels like it's what I'm supposed to be doing. When I say destiny.
Yeah. You were in San Francisco, as you mentioned earlier, and you were involved in the LGBT scene talk to us a little bit about what that was like, because, you know, the overwhelming majority of the people watching this podcast may have heard about this time, may have, you know, sort of seen Milk or some TV or movie or about it. But it's one thing to see it and imagine it and hear about it. It's another thing to live it. What was it like living it?
I was in the East Bay, across the bay from San Francisco, and it was Tom Amiano, who was a school teacher at the time and wanted to try some gay comedy, and he was able to get a night at the Valencia Rose, which was a little coffee house on Valencia Street. And I think he knew a few people already, Susie Berger and Leah Delaria. Well, I get a phone call saying, you want to come tell jokes? And I'm like, well, sure. So I'm in the city, and it's just like, it was packed. I mean, people were dying for gay humor. They hadn't heard us on stage talking about our lifestyle, our vaginas, and, you know, all the things we love to talk about, and being ourselves. And people just kept coming and coming, and more young people were coming out of the woodwork saying, oh, I'm funny, I can tell a joke. And then the next thing you know, there's Margaret Gomez, and, you know, Karen Williams is on the scene. And it just grew like natural. Of course, the AIDS epidemic hit there in the early 80s, and that was difficult. That was not funny. That was sitting in a room full of young guys with, you know, sunken eyes and losing their hair, and you just rise to the occasion, you know, and make them laugh. And then there was fundraiser after fundraiser after fundraiser. And then there were guys with AIDS coming out saying, I want to be a comedian. I want to tell AIDS jokes. You know, I mean, it was just like, there's this stupid joke. Okay. In the state of Texas, if you owned a home, this is back in the 80s, if you owned a home and you sell your home, you must inform the new tenants that the former tenants had AIDS. Why? Why? I figured, well, let's say you have AIDS and you have sex on the kitchen floor and you get some semen on the kitchen floor, and the new people move in and they have sex on the kitchen floor right where that semen is. I mean, I could have believed some of the bullshit. Then KQED decides to do a safe sex public announcement. So they take a banana, and they are demonstrating for all of us here in the Bay Area who get that channel how to probably put a condom on the banana, because I'm sure there's a lot of young people or men that didn't know. Well, the Banana Federation, I don't know, it was out of South America, threatened to sue KQED because they used a banana as a penis and not a cucumber or something. I don't know if there's a cucumber federation, but so there was just like all this kind of stuff was going on, and we're trying to make fun of it because, come on, it's a public health. Anyway,
I want to step back.
So it was kind of crazy.
Now, I want to step back a little bit. And before we talk about that particular era in more detail, because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in what you said that I'd like to dive in a little more deeply into. We'll talk about the early days of the Valencia Rose. You indicated that a lot of why this grew, I'm sort of gathering, was because there was a need that people felt for them to be able to hear comedy that they related to or that connected to their own self-expression as LGBTQ people. Yes. Why would that have been the case? What was the comedy scene like, particularly the stand-up comedy scene like on the outside of that world? Why exactly was there that need? Was there active discrimination? What were the dominant comedians and the vibes like at the dominant comedy clubs at that time?
You know, I wasn't necessarily a big comedy club person, but it was very straight, and gay was something you could make fun of. You would make fun of fat people, gay people, black people. I mean, there wasn't a political awareness to some extent. I mean, and some comedians were vicious. I remember going to the other cafe and I'm listening to Bobby Slayton. Now, this is in the late 70s, and he's talking about being arrested, by a gay cop, and the cop put the handcuffs on himself. Well, I must say that's kind of funny. But at the time, I'm sitting in the room, I'm like, oh, I'm the only gay person here, and they're just cracking up about these gays. And I did not feel safe at the time. I mean, Tom Amiano talks about that too, trying to go into some of the clubs where it was predominantly all straight. I didn't bother with the straight clubs. I kind of could care less. Suddenly, the Valencia Rose was a place where the gay comedians come in, and we didn't want the straight comedians for a while. It was like our place.
Right.
They had hundreds of places to go.
Right.
So now we have a place. Well, of course, we're bigger than they are, and eventually the door was open for everyone. But it was safe and it was ours. It was kind of like, those old women only cafes. People would go, oh, that's weird. But women want to just leave us alone for just an hour and let's have our own spot. Let's just commiserate among ourselves. And so that's kind of what the Rose was. And of course, all kinds of people came through there, not just Whoopi, but Sinbad. And then, oh God, Romanowski and Phillips and anyone who was coming to town that was funny or coming up from LA, they would try to get a few minutes.
That's amazing.
At the Rose. Yeah.
When it first started up, did any of the founders have any idea that this is where it would end up, or did they imagine it would always be sort of a niche location focusing on a niche audience?
I can't really speak for the founders. I think they were very excited that this happened. And, Ron Lanza was full of energy and was always looking for new talent and new ideas. And, I don't know what they thought as far as that goes. I just know they'd give me a call every couple of weeks and I'd come back in and it was just too much fun. And the city needed a place, and it became the place. Besides, we had the AIDS clinics and we had, coffee houses, but because it really was just a little coffee house, with a sandwich and a cup of tea.
You mentioned, though, that at one point, as everyone with any knowledge of history knows, and maybe some of the people watching this don't know, which is totally fine too, that the AIDS epidemic landed in the Bay Area as it did throughout the rest of the country. And it first and foremost hit the gay male community in large urban areas, which was a large part of your audience. What was the vibe like as that was emerging? And how did your comedy and the comedy of the community that you were in adapt to it and change? And did that affect your purpose or mission as a comedian at all?
Yes. The beginning, it was fear. We were all terrified. It's like, can I hug my gay male friends? And every lesbian is thinking, oh shit, did I sleep with a guy last week? And everyone was getting tested. And so lots of humor was coming out about safe sex. I mean, men had all kinds of condoms, Trojan, Chic, Magnum, Fiesta. I mean, it sounded like a party, all these brand names. And women, they had a little thing called a dental dam. And it was like, what? This little square piece of plastic. And you're like, what if my girlfriend's bigger than that? You know what I'm saying? It's like, and so, gloves were flying off the shelf. Everyone's getting latex gloves. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll wear a garbage bag. So I made a joke about putting on a garbage bag, put 2 holes in the bottom and put it on. It's like the world's biggest condom. And we tried to have fun with it, given that's what humor does. You try to turn some of that absolute pain into humor and to laugh at ourselves. And um, but there were times when there was a general fear, and then finally science got more and more informed. If you want to at least a peck on the cheek or
Right.
something, you're not going to die, okay? Because I mean, yeah, people were hysterical, but that's how they are with COVID too, I suppose. Not you just don't know
Right.
until we get the facts. Um, I was I remember my improv troupe. I was doing some improv, some comedy, and I was with Danny Williams, and we were doing a show at uh, University of California. There's a place called the Bears Lair right there in Berkeley on campus, and it was a gay comedy event. So I do my comedy and the girls do theirs. And then Danny Williams comes up and he does his. And of course, he's fabulous. Well, after the show, he goes over to the bar uh, to get a beer. And these, football jocks come over and they go, "Hey, fag, you should leave because we don't want to get
Mm.
it." And he's like, "What? Wit? Charm? Huh, you know, a sense of humor?" So even, when he was attacked, we all rose to the occasion to go, stop this bullshit. And he was a quick enough thinker, to, to fight back against, yeah, that's just one little example, but did that
It
answer your
did.
question?
One thing that you mentioned a little earlier, too, that I'd like to hear a little bit more about is the experience that you referenced of looking at the audience and seeing people that had their hair falling out, that were visibly sick, that were physically deteriorating or suffering the
Yes.
ravages of this terrible disease. When you first started doing comedy, you mentioned earlier, right, that you felt like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. You were up there on the stage and there was this sense of connection to your purpose. Did that change when you were up there standing looking at an audience who were facing things that may have been entirely different than that audience that you were standing in front of right when you first began doing stand up?
Um, hmm. You know, fortunately, my comedy is, I think, broad enough, inclusive enough, even though it's heavy gay. There's some generic stuff. Um, I didn't think of I wanted to be someone who was necessarily rich and famous. I mean, I wouldn't have turned down Ellen DeGeneres' job, I suppose, but I was convinced that wait, this is way too much pressure, and that I was more of a community, local
Mm-hmm.
kind of comic. It was more grassroots. I wasn't big on flying cross country and going to all these things. And you just it made me want to make
Mm-hmm.
them laugh more because I knew they wouldn't be here in a month. I mean, there were endless numbers of gay men in the community, endless, and women. And then, of course, women's breast cancer hit the Bay Area. Some it was the late '80s. I can't tell you how many shows I did to raise money for Women's Resource Center and battered women's shelters. And um, you just go in, you try to make them laugh, and you hope that for 20, 30 minutes, an hour, they forgot, you know, what was in front of them with regards to their health or, um, yeah, I guess it was a purpose. I mean, it was my purpose. I mean, that's all I wanted to do when I was a kid, and the idea of making people laugh just made me happy as a clam. It just, so I just went on my little mission and did that and made fun of our I'd made a lot of fun of our community too and said, look, let's hold a mirror up and look how bizarre we're being, okay? You can't, it's okay to eat white bread sometimes, you guys. You don't have to just like eat 9 grain bread all the time. Or, you know, you know, a little piece of meat won't kill. Well, it might, but I just I was reflecting back to all that was trying to go on at the times and say, can
Yeah.
we find some sanity here?
Yeah.
Is that what I'm saying?
You
Did
are
that answer
always,
your question? I
there's
hope.
no right or wrong answer. What I want to get is what's coming out of your
Good,
mind and what
good,
you're feeling in your heart that the questions might raise.
good. There we go.
You know,
All right,
how did you see,
all right.
particularly as the AIDS epidemic moved on and as the 80s progressed, shifts in the comedy culture around the treatment of LGBTQ people?
It was gradual, but more and more clubs would open their doors. You would have
Mm,
women's night, or once in a while you'd have gay night. I mean, it wouldn't be all the time. And then we started seeing more gays on TV, and that whole progression. Uh, and and people, everyone was waving a flag saying, I was the very first gay comedian on this show, and I was the first gay comedian, and I was the first this, and I was the first that. And I mean, it all was sort of happening all around the country. It was and this came, I think, the women's movement had a lot to do with this. And, the whole feminist movement, women were pushing, um, and there was a coming together when these guys got sick. It was a bunch
mhm,
of lesbians, a lot of lesbians
mhm,
who were taking care of them. Endless nurses and hospitals, and um, even though at first we were like, "Those are boys, we're girls. You stay on that side of the room with it." That
mhm.
changed during that epidemic, and there was a big uniting in many ways of,
Yeah,
wait, we need each other. There's too much
yeah.
hate out there. um, and Harvey Milk did a lot of good work, and other gay politicians, and we were going, wow, we're getting elected to offices. And so anyway, comedy, um, it just became almost normal gradually to have a gay character on a TV show. Um, there was a show, was it LA Law? I'll never forget. LA Law had two women kiss on the TV show, and this was early for this to happen. And L'Oreal was one of the sponsors. And L'Oreal says, if you continue this gay characters, we're gonna pull
Wow.
out. And I wrote L'Oreal a letter on L'Oreal. That is so stupid. First of all, lesbians are hairier than the average woman, and we use a lot of L'Oreal products. We're not shaving everything, okay? Well, it's to your advantage, to stay on. So that was the letter I wrote to them. But it was like that. Sponsors were going, we're dropping you because two women kissed. Ooh,
Well, I've got to ask though, did
yeah.
L'Oreal respond to your letter? And if so, what did they say?
No, no,
That's very disappointing.
no, of course. Yes. And those gay characters stayed on TV. I mean, if you're doing gay characters in Hollywood and once the door is open, it's like, I'm sorry, but there's a strong gay
Yeah.
community in Hollywood. So, and in the film industry, and all the arts. Yeah.
When Ellen came out on TV, do you believe that that had the sort of seismic impact on the visibility of LGBT comedians that people assume that it did, and did it have any sort of transformative effect in the stand-up comedy world outside of television?
It did not affect. Hmm. I can't say it affected me or the Bay Area or the West Coast that much. I mean, I honestly don't know the rest of the country. I mean, if you're in a cave in Oklahoma, maybe this is a new thing for you, And Oprah was having all kinds of gay people on TV and gay parents, and um, so for me and my community, it didn't seem like such a new big thing. I I suppose it did. She considers herself a trendsetter, and I think a lot of people do think that. I mean, Ellen didn't come out until she
Mm-hmm.
made her first million, and that was
Mm-hmm.
true with Rosie O'Donnell. They were gay all along, gay, 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 gay. And they were doing television and talk shows and stuff, but never, never. But once you made that first
Mm-hmm.
million, then they decided to come out. A lot of us
Mm-hmm.
came out from the gate. Now, maybe I have attitude here, but there's a pocket of us in San Francisco. We didn't wait to make money. We came out because that's what Harvey
Mm-hmm.
Milk told us to do. Harvey said, come out, come out. And so we all came out and with our art forms, and that was that. And I think some of us suffered to some extent as far as the
Mm-hmm.
broader media, because television was
Yeah.
still pretty narrow-minded, um, and that's okay. Now it's not that way. Now, I mean, now you're seeing television studios seeking out gay people, for
Right.
this role or that role or this commercial, and but they didn't want
Yeah.
us back then.
Karen,
All
in
right.
light of
Yeah.
the prejudices that people who came out of the closet as comedians or in other forms of the arts, particularly the performing arts, during that time period before they made their million, do you think that they and you would consider yourselves activists as well as comics or other performers?
I've always considered myself an activist. Yeah. We were having fun and we were activists. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's sort of like street theater. People, you pass the hat and that's your salary. You're an activist. Absolutely. Um, I could not, I mean, this sounds stupid. I could not believe people wouldn't like me.
I know I've had that problem too.
All right. Well, it just, I think I lost track of the question, but yeah, I was an activist, absolutely. And my humor, I think, would reflect that. Um, there was a little play I wrote called Waiting for FEMA. This was after the New
Mm-hmm,
Orleans
mm-hmm.
floods,
Yeah.
Hurricane Katrina. And I guess the way I could describe activists is in this little play, there's two women stuck on a roof and they're screaming and they see junk floating by and dead bodies. And because that to me was one of the biggest, I can't even tell you what Katrina did to me. But anyway, so a helicopter comes by and they're waving, oh, helicopter, save us, right? Well, it just so happens around that same time, floating past them is a big bag, and the woman pulls it out, and it's
Mm-hmm.
full of money because some of the
Mm,
casinos were flooded, and this was a huge bag of money. And she's like, "Oh my God, look at this money!" And the helicopter's hovering, and they lower a basket, and they're saying, "That basket's too small for a human. We need a bigger basket." And they're going,
mhm.
"Put the money in the basket."
Yeah.
And you're like, "What?"
Mhm.
Put the money in the basket.
Yeah.
So we put the money in the basket and the
Yeah.
helicopter flies
Yeah.
away. Okay. So it's these kind of stories I try to tell, or like the Humunga Mart Depot. Imagine Halliburton and Walmart merge and they become a department store. Okay. And I'm an old lady trying to sabotage this big department store. I could go on, but yes, I'm an
Do
activist.
you view, in terms of your life purpose, being an activist first or funny?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, if I don't think it's funny, I won't tell it. But um, I do try to say things that kind of tweak people a little and pisses them off. Um, like in the early days, so many of us we dress like men. A lot of dykes we dress like men. That was the uniform: plaid shirt, jeans, and boots, because it's our work
Yeah.
clothes because we had work to do. And um, I would say, well, is it okay to hate men but dress just like them? And
Yeah,
people
how did
would
they
go,
react?
is that funny? Yeah, yeah. And I'd be like, well, okay, we're dressing just like guys, but we hate them. So anyway, time went by and we stopped hating them. But, you know, uh, just those kinds of things. Just trying to wake people up again, hold the mirror. I guess the purpose is activism because I realize things and then I think, oh, I
Yeah,
should share that, with other people, and it
yeah,
comes out funny. Um, like now I'm old, and I thought, well, I'll start dating again. It's been a while. And I meet this woman, I go, look, I'm 70. I don't have time to wine and dine, okay? You want to just get intimate. She says, well, what'd you have in mind? I said, well, would you cut my toenails? I can't reach them anymore. So this is
yeah,
real life
yeah.
stuff.
I love it.
Yeah.
Karen, what would you say to someone, let's say she's a young queer woman who wants to be the next Karen Ripley, but she just feels like, it might be too hard, or she's nervous that there will be a place for her out there, or she might be struggling to find her voice. Would you have any advice for someone like that?
Um, well, it's a different landscape now, but I spent a lot of time flying by the seat of my pants. I think if you want to be a comedian, not only do you want to be a good writer and get lots of experiences in your life, because for me, that's where the humor comes from. Every time I travel or do something new, I get ideas. Um, no marketing.
Mm,
First of all, marketing. I had
hmm.
no idea. A lot of people don't know who I am because I did not have a major
Right.
marketing thing going on. I didn't know exactly where all the places were in the early days to go. I was forever searching and fortunately, there were enough other gay comics that were very giving and loving and shared the information. It was very supportive in the early days, but um, you just hang around the clubs. You, I mean, nowadays they get on like this, the podcasts and the Zooms and uploading. I don't, I didn't do that, and I really still don't do that. No, there's a place out there. It's just going to be a little harder. See, when I started doing gay comedy, there were only a
Yeah.
few of us. Really, there were only a few gay comics that I knew that were actually out and about. And it was kind of cool being, oh, I'm kind of unique. Look at here. And now there are a dime a dozen. And I'm like, I liked it when I was unique. But, uh, but, um, yeah, just keep writing. Just put it in bite-sized pieces, get a business card, get a headshot, and then a week later write a joke, and then make a few phone calls, and a week later write another joke. I mean, it
Yeah.
builds. It just
Yeah.
builds, you know.
Talk to us a little bit about what you see for yourself in the future. Talk to us about any projects that you have ongoing right now. Talk to us about where people can find you online. And tell me, is it true that there is a documentary film that's hitting the film festival circuit right now and winning awards that you are heavily featured in?
Why, yes, there is. Actually, I have this right here, this lovely
That's
item,
it.
and
It looks beautiful.
yeah, yes, that was so much fun, and uh, it's a unique time. It was a unique time, and it cannot be forgotten in our history. Um, like all the big gay events, you know. I remember Tom came up to me one day and said, "Oh, I have this friend. He's making a quilt," and I'm like, "Really?" My mom makes quilts. He goes, "No, no,
Mm.
no, it's an AIDS quilt," and I'm like, "An AIDS quilt?" And I didn't know what he was talking about. And he goes, "Well, they need someone to tell jokes." And I go, "Okay, I'll tell jokes for these guys making quilts." Well, then I realized it was. I'm slow sometimes. It was the AIDS quilt. No, what's coming up for me is I'm working with David Ford at the Marsh. I'm reworking a show or play. I don't know what it is yet, called Memories
Mm.
of Resistance. And this is not particularly funny. I've been writing more and more monologues and trying to short stories. Not that I get bored with comedy, but uh, I'm not out and about in the comedy scene like I used to be. I'm not traveling like I used to be. And so my brain is focusing more on just doing my work in a different way. So um, this play is, and I know this woman. I met a woman years ago. I was in a relationship with her daughter. At the age of 15, she was in Denmark when the Nazis occupied Denmark, and they killed her
Mm.
father. And she joined the resistance, skinny little Danish girl, and she
Wow.
smuggled Jews out of Denmark because she was very familiar with
Right.
the landscape and
Wow.
all the villages and so on. And she did this countless numbers of time, literally like lying on their
Wow.
stomach for hours, crawling out
Wow.
to the boats. And it blows my mind. The stories she used to tell and the things I've read. They didn't have cell phones, they didn't have texting. You know, how do you know who to trust? You know, you're like,
Mhm. Yeah.
and this, I mean, are you Norwegian? Are you
Right.
Danish? Are you a Nazi? Um, and part of this idea came to me, well, because the story has haunted me all along. But in the early part of the Trump years, there was so much resistance. Everyone had a bumper sticker out here that said "resist, resist, resist," and I thought, well, how do you resist? And what is it where resist? Okay, let's get and do you have some little underground club or like these? Anyway, this is my brain scattered, but this is a story about
Hmm.
resistance in
Hmm.
the 40s when, I mean, imagine these white supremacists take over
Right.
DC,
Yeah.
okay? And you're like,
Yeah.
I got to resist. What do?
Yeah.
Get them out of here. So this is where I'm at now, which is obviously different than funny. But I intend to make this kind of funny. There's got to be humor in there somewhere. Someone trips over the dog. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something funny will happen. So I'm chipping away at that. But otherwise, I'm really not doing too much comedy. I would consider myself semi-retired and um, just grateful that I got to be included and that I will live on in history.
Stand Up, Stand Out is the name of the documentary for those who might just be listening to
Yeah.
it. And it
Yes.
is a history of
Yeah.
the early LGBTQ comedy movement in San Francisco, including a lot of discussion about the Valencia Rose, which you shared with us earlier in this interview as well, Karen. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. David um,
Absolutely.
Pavlovsky. Pa- Pavlovsky. Is he Polish?
He is not. We don't know exactly
They
what his background is, but we're pretty sure it's not Polish. I think it might be Ukrainian, maybe Czech. No.
Well, he was one of the nicest, most respectful people I've worked with. He'd come to town and he goes, "I'm in town. Can I take you to dinner?" And I'm like, "Yeah."
Well, as a matter of full disclosure, he is my husband. So, so anyone listening to this will know. They won't look up the film and be shocked later that she's telling me about this nice, polite person, and I'm acting surprised, knowing full well that I'm married to him.
Yes, and he is nice. Yes.
Karen, it has been amazing having you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I've totally enjoyed this walk down memory lane and discovered a few things.
And we're glad to have discovered them with you. And for everyone tuning in, make sure that you join us next time for another episode of Scott Mason's Purpose Highway. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Join our community today at purposehighway.com and subscribe to get notified when new episodes go live. Scott Mason, checking out.